Let me know if anybody knows that it goes live here. Sometimes it's like it's already live, but it doesn't say that it's live.
It just
Awkward.
went live.
Nice.
I got my link. I'm going to go share it right now.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody here in Colorado. Welcome to this week's live stream with the Libertarian Party of Colorado. We got Michael Vance, the legislative director. And
Hey, everybody.
how you doing, Michael?
I'm doing well, all things considered. How about yourself?
Oh, pretty good. I'm Brandon Wark, freestatecolorado.com. Thanks for joining us here. We do have some special guests as well. Actually, let me stop the share so we can go and introduce our guests, what we got going on here. So we saw Michael Vance, legislative director, and we got Mayor of Monument, Mitch LeKind. How are you doing, Mayor?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for allowing us to crash your party again. Appreciate what you guys are doing.
Definitely. And then we have the
Yeah.
Monument Mayor Pro Tem, Steve King. Steve, how are you, sir?
Good, thank you. Glad to be participating in your chat again. It was kind of a last moment thing, but happy to be on board.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate you joining. Love to get your insight, some of the information that you have on some of this legislation, especially legislation that affects so many of Colorado's smaller communities across the state. So let's go ahead and bring the live stream back up here, the slide deck. There we go. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We'll go ahead and jump right on in. As usual, we kind of want to talk about some of well, kind of unusual actually. We have a very unusual situation this week. Couldn't not bring this up, of course. So, for those who didn't know, the state house met today for about 7 hours, deciding a couple of bills. The most egregious and probably the most tuned into or interesting bill is 1292, the gun ban, where they're going to ban 80% of the most common types of firearms available in Colorado. Some of the most commonly owned guns in the state would be illegal to purchase, to sell, to transfer, or to buy if this bill ends up getting passed and becomes law. Fortunately, it's still got a ways to go. We think the Senate will probably kill it. The governor doesn't necessarily agree with it. And of course, the courts will strike it down. So there's a lot of good things. I hate all the negativity that people have. Of course, this is the worst thing we've seen gun wise in the state of Colorado in a very long time, the most egregious anti gun bill we've probably ever seen. The fact that it's made it this far, has gotten through the state house, is should be shocking, should be putting everybody on edge, I guess, or everybody really on notice, understanding where we're at politically speaking in our state. Where before the legislation like this last year didn't make it out of committee. This year made it through the House. It's just making that progress, and that's a lot of what these anti-gunners are doing. They know they can't erase the Second Amendment all at once as much as they would love to, so they push piecemeal legislation, gain some ground, gain some progress every year. So these are the legislators, these 35 in the state house today who voted to pass this egregious gun ban. So remember those names, especially if those people represent you and your community. It's definitely somebody you want to reach out to and make them know how displeased you are, and maybe that they should be seeking another line of employment come November for these bad anti-gun legislators. Of course, very interesting to see the 8 Democrats who did join voting no, some in very strong swing seats, like Mary Young, for example, Bob Marshall. So kind of interesting to see that dynamic play out there as well. Perfect. So we got a special guest joining us. We have Ian Escalante coming in at about 8 o'clock to talk about the gun bill. So we won't spend too much more time on that now, but of course had to address that. That's one of the biggest stories of the day. But let's look at last week's bills. So these are the bills we talked about, went through. Let's give you an update on what happened to them last week. So House Bill 1154, the charter schools and bond indebtedness did pass. That was a good bill for charter schools. 1311 was a really, really bad bill, taking away our taxpayer bill of rights refunds if it does become law. That did pass, unfortunately, out of committee, but it was a really narrow vote, and there might be some opportunity to stop this bill from becoming law. Of course, 1353, the firearms dealer requirements and permit did pass, creating a new licensing and registration scheme for gun dealers across Colorado. Tuesday of last week, Senate Bill 65 to create a new civil penalty for people using their cell phones while driving did pass committee. The Sustainable Local Government Community Planning, that vote was delayed, 1366. Of course, one of the bigger news stories this week in the legislature was House Resolution 1006, the impeachment of Colorado Secretary of State Janet Griswold. To no one's surprise, that bill was killed by the Democratic majority, of course. They're not going to impeach the Secretary of State. No chance of that happening. Nobody was surprised with that outcome, but nonetheless, some good political theatrics. And love seeing Griswold kind of be taken down a peg, trying to slow down her ambitions. Of course, she wants to be the governor after Polis is out. So good on the House Republicans for pushing back and kind of creating a little bit of a roadblock for her. House Bill 1303, the Colorado Open Meetings Law for the General Assembly. That was Elizabeth Epps' bill, totally at odds with her caucus, was killed, no surprise there. The Alcohol Impact and Recovery Enterprise, that was a new alcohol taxation scheme that they're rolling out this year that did get delayed, so some good news there. Finishing up with last week's bills, 1356 to outlaw electronic smoking devices unless they're FDA approved, unfortunately passed. 1378, consumer protection and event ticket sales passed. Senate Bill 3, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, getting $1.5 million or so to go after firearms crimes, going after your local gun dealer for having maybe something larger than a 50-round magazine. That did pass, of course. House Bill 1380, the regulation of debt-related services, passed. 1239, very interesting to see this one get killed. Maybe get some comment here from the Monument Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem if you'd like to join in. I don't know if you're familiar with that bill. 1239 would have single exit stairway multifamily structure, basically overriding local zoning laws, from what I understand, by allowing builders to have single exit stairways for apartment buildings, for condos, or places that have multiple people living in it and multiple residents. And the firefighters were really against it because it could have been a very dangerous way to build buildings. So that was killed. So any input from yeah.
Yeah, I just checked our tracker. That was on our oppose for obvious reasons. Glad to see that it died. We probably would have reviewed it on Thursday when we do our legislative update with our lobbyist. So yeah, we strongly oppose that.
Basically, they're just trying to get more square footage out of a building, and but it doesn't change. It still doesn't change anything as far as affordability goes. There's nothing that's going to happen with that other than making the building less expensive to build and more unsafe for the residents that are in it.
Very interesting. Thanks for that input. Glad to see that bill did get killed. And, look, because is it currently the case if a local municipality wants to allow the single exit stairway buildings can they do that, or is the state preventing that?
Well, it's not in the building code right now, as far as I know. I think that, that would supersede the building code if they did something like that.
Yeah, and everybody's got probably a different set of building codes. I mean, there's the ones that are at the federal level that the local building departments will ask to be passed. Like we down here have the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department, which is technically the town's building department, so no one in, I think only Colorado Springs has their own building department. Maybe not, but PPRBD is got all the codes, and they run them by all of the councils and boards to make sure that we are in agreement or not. Not they probably would listen to us if there was something coming down from like the electrical and I don't know what the group's called, but the people who do plumbing and electrical and things of that nature at the federal level and set those guidelines and push them down. We don't have our own building codes that would allow us to usurp what the building department follows.
Yeah, they're actually international building codes, and
right.
Local municipalities can have supplements for those if they wish, and supersede some, or generally when they have supplements, it's to add more codes to the standard code book.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. So much of this state housing laws seem to be trying to get local communities to follow some sort of one-size-fits-all state centrally planned idea, and doesn't really take into account all these different communities across Colorado. Everybody's got their own building codes based on what's best for their communities, right?
Well, yeah, generally speaking, but it's more about zoning. They want a one-size-fits-all zoning, and the problem is each municipality is unique and has its own special features, and also has its issues with infrastructure and road design and water and lifestyle, and they want everything to be the same. People move to an area to experience a certain lifestyle and be in a particular part of the country even. And here we've got a lot of outdoor activities with a lake and hiking and other things, and people move here to be kind of part of nature. And we don't want to be downtown Denver.
That sounds like the testimony I heard on 1313 today.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Wasn't me.
That bill passed, even though we're in opposition of it. This is the Housing and Transit Oriented Communities bill. And while Monument is not subject to what this bill does, a lot of the testimony, including from the Democrats, several of them, the representative from Golden, I can't remember what her name is, but she was against it because of what it would do to Golden, because it fell within their space, their area as far as transit goes, and it would require a change in the zoning to allow up to 40 dwelling units per acre. Now, to her point, can you imagine driving into Golden and hit what is a very quaint and beautiful downtown? Coors is off to the side. You're probably there to take part in food or take a brewery tour, and you come across a 10-story building or bigger in order to accommodate the 40 dwelling units per acre. And her point was, no, there was no water planned for that, as far as the size of the pipes for water and sanitation. And if they don't comply, cities like Colorado Springs would lose 20 million a year in HUFT funding, which comes from the gas tax and registration fees on our vehicles. So to the one size fits all, each community is so unique that you can't just slap a bill together and say this is going to work for the Western Slope or the Plains when it's really designed only for Denver. That's all it's designed for.
Right. And Colorado Springs even has a regulation, and I don't remember exactly what it is as far as park acre space per unit per person that's there. And so I'm going to kind of make this up a little bit, but say for every 5,000 people, there's 2 acres of park or whatever it is. When you start increasing this density, you start changing that aspect of it. And if that's part of their code, I don't know how they fix that. And sooner or later, you have less and less space of open space for people to, relax and take their dogs and everything else. So yeah, there's a lot more that goes into this other than just creating density.
Yeah, good point. Definitely the governor's plan to create high density housing around these mass transit corridors. We'll be talking about that a little bit more with some of the bills this week, I believe, in committee hearing. But just let's go ahead and wrap up with what we saw last week here. House Bill 1242, Colorado Department of Transportation outdoor advertising rules. That was Mike Lynch's bill, did get killed. Kind of interesting to see that. 1285, the student weight-based bullying prevention did pass. So have no fear, everybody. Bullying based on weight will no longer occur in Colorado, thanks to our state legislature.
Nice.
Oh, man.
Thursday of last week, a good bill passed, the Chamber of Commerce alcohol special event permit, allowing Chamber of Commerce to have alcohol for special events. So great. Let's step in the right direction. We got to celebrate our victories when we get them. House Bill 1121, kind of a contentious bill, the Consumer Right to Repair Digital Electronic Equipment, that did pass committee. Senate Bill 198, the Regulated Natural Medicine Implementation, passed. 1170, the Rights for Youth Division of Youth Service Facilities, passed. Secure Firearm Storage and Vehicle, House Bill 1348, also passed, of course, as you'd expect. Same with the Concealed Carry Permits and Training, unfortunately passed 1174. And then the school safety measures bill did get killed. That was Senate Bill 1310. That was very good to see that bill die. That was a very bad bill designed to go after the FASTER program or any other program that trains school staff, teachers, teaches them how to use a firearm to defend their students and defend their facility. This bill was really designed to shut down those programs. So it was really exciting to see House Bill 1310 die in committee this last week. So a good victory there. As well as on Thursday last week, 1363, the Charter Schools Accountability Bill was also killed. So, of course, as you can imagine, many of our Democrats in the state legislature do not like competition for public schools. They think the government school systems cannot be improved or changed in any way. Just give them more money, which we'll talk about this week. So they were going after charter schools, trying to hold them accountable in their own words, making it a lot harder for them to operate and easier for them to get shut down. So thankfully that bill did get killed as well. So that's what we got from last week. Any other comments before we jump into this week's bills from anybody?
Let's get into it.
Perfect. Awesome. So let's jump in here in House Bill 1130, the privacy of biometric identifiers and data. Kind of an interesting bill. So for Monday, we got quite a bit lined up here. So this couple in the Senate Judiciary Committee here. Very interesting to see this protecting of privacy of an individual's biometric data. This is becoming the new hot topic in privacy law, is what does not deserve to be protected. Whether it's your brainwave patterns, your neurological imprint, anything along those lines, is that considered to be privileged data that should be protected? Of course, we'd say that the government is not going to hold themselves to those standards, I'm sure, but nonetheless, creating these new requirements for companies to kind of control who has access to biometric identifiers, kind of an interesting, brave new world. I would say this bill's probably a pro-liberty bill here. And for our panelists too, feel free to interrupt me at any time. Sometimes with the live stream, it's a little bit of a lag, so just jump right in. And if you see something come up that you're interested in talking about here. So being heard Monday in the Judiciary Committee at 1:30 p.m. in the old Supreme Court should be a good pro-liberty bill, kind of limiting how biometric identifiers and data can be used and who has access to it. All right, so moving on. An interesting bill also being heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee, probably a not so pro-liberty bill depends on your perspective, I suppose, here, but Senate Bill 1118, indeterminate sex offender sentencing. So Senator Julie Gonzalez doesn't think that sex offenders should have to serve a minimum sentence, really, is what it comes down to. That there shouldn't be some sort of mandatory minimum determinate sentence for sex offenders. So I think it's pretty bold for some of these Democrats to push a bill so in defense of sex offenders, especially in today's political climate. But nonetheless, here we are, and so this bill is going to be heard on Monday here tomorrow.
I understand that there can be issues with some minimum sentencing standards, etc. But I mean, I'm sorry, this is just so absurd. There should be no reason to limit the punishment of a sex offender, somebody who's going out and harming people in the most intimate of ways. I don't understand what's going on in the minds of some of these legislators. I mean, last year we had what we're calling the pedo 27, the 27 House representatives that voted against minimum minimum standards for sex offenders there. Thankfully, there is no House sponsor on this one as of this time, but this is just absolutely absurd. I mean, I don't know what to say about some of these people. How does Julie Gonzalez still have a job at this point?
That I think we would need a whole show to discuss how the legislators are allowed to create these bills, right? They're allowed 5 each.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine there's a cost to the taxpayer, not just the salary of the legislator, but the cost to put these bills through. You talked about the weapons ban. Think about what that's going to cost the taxpayer for them to defend that if Polis were to sign it.
Yeah, they'd much rather spend their time trying to prosecute law-abiding citizens for purchasing guns or something else than they would be going after true criminals.
But sex offenders and pedophiles, that's fine. They'll let them go all day long, even though they committed a crime. And those of us on the call who happen to own firearms have not yet been deemed a criminal, but it's coming, right?
Yep. Yep.
100% that'd be their goal. It's very interesting to see some of these bills go through that are, it's hard to even imagine, right? It's hard to even believe sometimes that some of these legislators think it's a good idea to put bills forward that are going to make life a little bit easier for sex offenders, for violent criminals. However, law-abiding gun owners or people they don't like in society, they're going to go after to the full extent of the law if at all possible. So Interesting bill, bad bill. Senate Bill 118 being heard on Monday, Judiciary Committee 1:30 p.m. in the old Supreme Court. So we'll jump ahead and see what else we got going on Monday. So interesting bill in the House State Civic Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, otherwise known as the Kill Committee. House Committee looks like 1003, excuse me, 1003, House Concurrent Resolution. So this is Representative Ron Weinberg, kind of a freshman legislator from the Loveland area there, running this bill here for creating a new school choice system. So because of this type of resolution, it would go to the registered electors of the state of Colorado. So this would get on the ballot. An amendment to the Colorado Constitution concerning school choice in the K through 12 education system. So check this out. The concurrent resolution would create a constitutional right that children have equal opportunity to and access to a quality education, that parents, guardians, and legal custodians have the right to direct the education of their children through school choice, and that parents, guardians, and legal custodians may choose school choice options for their children, including neighborhood schools, charter schools, private schools, home schools, open enrollment options, and future innovations in education. So, of course, that right there explains why this bill is in the Kill Committee, because allowing school choice is a big threat, of course, an existential threat to the political authoritarians' control over society by taking away kids out of the indoctrination, that K through 12 system that keeps them honed in and becoming these little zealots for the program, right?
This would be something I think Polis would want to go through. But given the committee it's assigned to, it'll never see the light of day, unfortunately.
No, it's a great point. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm also disappointed that there is no Senate sponsor on this one.
Yeah, and it's a good point too. A lot of times, Mayor, you brought up a good point there, because so many times people say the Republicans or the Democrats, or as if they're a uniform, and it's not entirely true, right? We got to be accurate. Somebody like Jared Polis supports school choice, would love to have something like this come through. Of course, the majority of the Democrats in the legislature, funded by the teachers' unions, or that's where their volunteer base comes from. They know who signs those checks. So, of course, yeah, dead on arrival, this type of bill, unfortunately.
I'm hoping
But
over the next few months that somebody gets with Corey DeAngelis, because Corey DeAngelis has been huge across this country in terms of, I would actually say he's probably been the biggest advocator for school choice in the country. So it'd be nice if somebody could get with him to kind of help push some of this legislation through.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's some amazing opportunity in the ballot measure arena for school choice. I think it's an issue that's overwhelmingly supported by people across the state. For the most part, outside of the political circles, of course, but just your average person, your average voter, they want the best education possible for their kids, for the kids in their community. And we all know that public education sometimes is lacking. So creating more choice, more options, and better outcomes for students is a winning issue. And it's something that definitely I think the Republicans, if they want to see some electoral gains, should probably focus on an issue like this. The school choice, I think, is a great winning issue that really reaches to unaffiliated voters as well. So just wanted to bring that up.
Right, because otherwise the only other choice is homeschooling. So it would sure be nice to have this charter school aspect of it as well.
Definitely. Definitely. So great bill. Anybody out there, part of the reason we do these calls every week is to get people interested and aware of what's happening in our state legislature. So much of political conversations have to do with national politics, but of course, to recognize somebody like Ron Weinberg here, state representative, who's doing a good job pushing a bill like this. So if you know Representative Weinberg, give him kudos for this bill, and show up and speak in support if you can. Send a letter to an email, a letter, text message, phone call, show up in committee, testify over Zoom. But this is a good bill that should be supported. And when there's a good piece of legislation out there like this, Colorado's liberty community should show up and do what you can to speak in favor of good legislation. So this will be heard Monday, April 15th at 1:30 p.m. in LSBA. That's the Legislative Service Building across the street from the state capitol in the State Civic, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. So thank you to Representative Weinberg out there for pushing this legislation through. Of course, it's not going anywhere, but nonetheless, making that good effort. We'll go ahead and keep going here. So a very interesting bill, another one in the same committee. Now, this would probably be the right committee that this bill would be assigned to, because it has to do with elections. So it wouldn't necessarily be it would be sent to the state committee because it has to do with state elections. So I'm sure this bill probably is going to get killed, but nonetheless, I had to bring it up. Extremely interesting bill from Representative Bob Marshall. Of course, Bob Marshall is probably in one of the tightest swing seats in the state legislature. So Bob Marshall's been a little bit more of a relatively conservative vote from the Democrats' perspective, trying not to be as out there as some of his colleagues. And this bill that he's running this year would submit to the registered electors of the state of Colorado an amendment to the Colorado Constitution concerning a prohibition on a person being a state legislator for a term of office immediately following a term for which the person was appointed to fill a vacancy in the General Assembly for that office. So, as you probably know, or maybe you don't, but about a third of the state legislature currently has been appointed. People resign and they get appointed to the position by a vacancy committee, which means that the voters in that district didn't necessarily elect them or didn't elect them to represent them. And unfortunately, we're getting some of the extreme leftist types, like Lorena Garcia, Tim Hernandez, name a few, who are pushing some of the most extreme legislation Colorado's ever seen. And they were just appointed in one of these committees, these vacancies. So they didn't even go through the normal election process like Bob Marshall did. So very interesting bill to try and stem that use of vacancy committee for somebody to get in there. Sort of makes sense. You get in the vacancy committee, but then to ride that train, incumbents we know have a better chance of winning than not. So, getting them in office and being an incumbent, they're more likely to win the next one. So this would stop that. So really interesting. Any thoughts on this one?
I think you're going to run into a First Amendment issue here. We just went through this with, our Secretary of State trying to determine who is eligible for a ballot and who's not. I think I get what he's trying to do, but I think it would be better suited to say that if you're appointed, that during the term that you are appointed, you cannot put forth any bills. This is I know that we have freshman representatives and senators that have never done this before and they get thrown the fire, they're drinking from the fire hose, but I would much rather see an appointed rep or senator not be permitted to submit a bill. If they want to co-sponsor, that's something else, but not have their name front and center. I think you'll run into a First Amendment issue with prohibiting somebody from actually trying to qualify and get on a ballot.
It's a great idea. I'd love it if these legislators who are appointed through a vacancy committee are not allowed to introduce new legislation. I think that'd be a huge win for democracy, for this idea of representative government, where the people are deciding who represents them and then they put forward those bills. So yeah, definitely agree with you there. I think that'd be a great step forward. I don't think this bill is going to go anywhere, this resolution at least, but we'll see here on Monday.
Hernandez would not have been able to be a prime sponsor on 1292 if that would have been enacted. So I hear you.
And seeing Representative Marshall is the only one on this bill, so I think he knows the writing's on the wall as well. This bill's not moving anywhere, but nonetheless, it's a good campaign piece, I would say, based on his perspective, right? Looking at the wider context of why a lot of this legislation is introduced. Representative Marshall knows he's going to be facing a tough year for this November, so introducing bills like this to kind of show that he's out there trying to make a difference and he's pushing back against some of the extreme the Democratic Socialist of America candidates is pretty interesting. So definitely an interesting bill this week. Go ahead and move on. So that was for the House State Civic and Military Veterans Affairs Committee. Moving over to the House Finance Committee, we got 3 more bills being heard tomorrow, Monday, of interest here. So a bill we've talked about early on this year when it was first introduced, when it was first heard in committee, but really a good bill authorizing certain persons licensed to sell alcohol beverages at retail to sell alcohol beverages for consumption off of a licensed premise. So Senate Bill 20, the alcohol beverage delivery and takeout. Sometimes people say it's one of the only good things that came out of those COVID years is this idea of getting alcoholic beverages for takeout and delivery. So, allowing them from doing this seems to be a good thing. So kind of a step in the right direction there. Pretty broad bipartisan support for this bill. So,
and we're on monitor on that one for some reason. I don't know if Steve remembers why we're monitoring this one.
I don't remember why.
Is there a fiscal note on this? I'm pulling it up. I don't think we would have been concerned with $83,000 and the one head count. I get more concerned when I see 8 bodies show up on that fiscal note to grow the government bigger. But
Right.
yeah, we set this to monitor for some reason, and again, we won't know until Thursday. But yeah, to your point on the COVID, who knew you could go to your favorite Mexican place, get tacos and a margarita and a sippy cup, and head home with it, right?
Well, they had
Yeah,
to help them out as much as they could because
right.
that's most of their income.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
pretty simple. You put a special sticker on it, and I mean, it's basically makes it tamper proof. So why haven't we done this years ago?
right.
Right.
Well, somebody in the YouTube chat says, how does this affect open container laws and open container definitions? But I think, Michael, you had mentioned for people who've gotten takeout alcohol before, they do put some sort of sticker on it or some sort of seal, kind of tongue in cheek. That's not going to prevent anything, like Michael was saying. But in general, for those out there, that's kind of the idea. They put a lid on it, put a piece of tape on it, and there you go. So
Well, you can open up
it's not
anything you buy at the liquor store, so it really doesn't change anything.
Absolutely.
right.
Just
So when they
make
give it to you,
it's tamper the sticker itself, it's tamper proof. So um yeah, so you can tell, a cop can tell that if it's been tampered with or not.
so good bill. Glad to see this finally becoming a statute in state law here. So as you can see, it did make it all the way through the Senate. Passed the Senate, now is going through the House. So that's when we talked about it previously, was those Senate votes back in January. Moving on now to the House, which we expect just will fly through and become law relatively soon. So Monday in the Finance Committee, House Committee Room 112 is where this bill will be heard. So, people show up, testify, get involved. Even a bill like this isn't necessarily going to change the world, but nonetheless, it's a good bill that kind of moves us in the right direction from a liberty perspective. Now, two other bills in the House Finance Committee that maybe don't do that is we'll talk about next year. So, House Bill 1330. Oh gosh, we've seen a whole host of anti-oil and gas, anti-manufacturing, anti-industrial bills this year. 1330 is another example of them really going after the oil and gas industry and creating these new permits and really beefing up the Colorado Clean Air Commission and doing everything they can to really make it harder for our oil and gas industry to succeed and thrive here in Colorado, unfortunately. So kind of a nuanced bill here in terms of what it does, but really changes how they issue permits and making sure that the permits you're getting are going to offset whatever they need to and are going to follow the rules. So modifying the process to obtain permits, you can pretty much guarantee, especially when you look at the bill sponsors, that this is moving in the wrong direction from a liberty standpoint.
Well,
So thankfully, yeah,
us old guys remember when there was a big brown cloud over Denver and you couldn't see the mountains for days at a time. And we've come a long, long ways in cleaning up the air, and I'm glad for that. I mean, it was bad then, but that last whatever 5% or 3% gets really costly. And the more that they continue to do this, the more expensive it's going to be. But the agenda is to just get rid of oil and gas altogether, and we all know that. So
There you go. You
they're
just
trying to do it.
look at that 19 FTEs. I mean, come on. You're building another entity within the government to control this, what you're saying, the last 3%.
Right.
And 19, really? Are they going to be carrying a pager around when they see smog? They're going to get paged out to go capture the smog or something. I mean, what are they going to do with a whole department of people for this?
paperwork. They're, they're
Right.
going to be doing paperwork, shuffling papers back and forth between the different commissions and the different offices of the Department of Public Health and Environment. So yeah, nonetheless, bad bill there, especially adding a whole new department worth of employees to the state government, of course, to the wrong part of the government as well, if you're interested in the defending the oil and gas industry. So bad bill, 1330 being heard Monday. in the Finance Committee there, House Committee Room 112, 1:30 p.m. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. Another bill being heard in the House Finance Committee, Senate Bill 53. Now, a very interesting bill here. There's been some media coverage on it, so it's not not outlandish to say that this is kind of setting up the idea of possible reparations legislation in the future. You know, trying to give taxpayer money to people, even though Colorado did not participate in the old slave system, whatever you want to get into that way. But nonetheless, of course, you know, creating this racial equity study. It's actually gotten amended pretty heavily. So anytime somebody's looking at a bill here on the state legislative website, and you see all these crossouts and italics, that's amendments to the bill. So the changes in the bill, the bill's changed quite a bit since we saw it last, since we've discussed it previously. But definitely an interesting bill establishing the Black Coloradan Racial Equity Commission in the legislative department to conduct, so that there he tells you kind of the answer right there. It's all about creating new legislation, of course, to conduct a study to determine and make recommendations related to any historical and ongoing effects of slavery and subsequent systemic racism on Black Coloradans that may be attributed to Colorado state practices, systems, and policies. So there you go. We'll have a whole department within our legislative, or a whole staff within our legislative department studying racial equity issues. So
And remember what equity is. It's not equality of opportunity. It's equality of outcomes, which is basically communism, because who's going to force the outcomes? It's going to be the people with guns in the government. So at what point, yeah, I mean, at what point is going to be too much for something like this? I mean, I'm afraid about how far they're going to want to try to push the legislation out of this bill. If you follow James Lindsay, I highly recommend following James Lindsay, and I would consider him probably the foremost expert on DEI and all this stuff. So it gets wild and extremely bigoted extremely fast.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Michael, too, because yeah, equality is one thing, right? Being equal under the law, having the same expectations of anybody based on race, age, gender, you know, you name it. That's a good thing about civil society and about free society, of course. But when equity is really about, you know, chopping somebody's legs off so we're all the same height, you know, really trying to make it so everybody has to have equal outcome, even though, you know, it's if you ever read Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, you know, if somebody is a little bit faster than the other person, they got to put weights on them to slow them down. If somebody can hear better, they got to stick something in their ears so they can't hear as well. So that's kind of the idea, unfortunately. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of this type of legislation, this study, and where it goes. And hopefully, we don't see some sort of reparations package come out of it in the coming years. But nonetheless, one of the interesting bills of the week for sure.
And I could see that just going after Tabor as a driving force, as a financial vehicle, right? I mean, as it is, they've got the child tax care credit that's going to suck up half a Tabor for the next year or 3 or 5, however many years they put it in place for. They've been trying to get rid of Tabor rather than just ask the people, get it on a ballot and see if they want to get rid of it, because that's the only way to make the constitutional change. But they just keep finding ways to tap away for it. So if they went for reparations and they somehow got it passed, whatever the dollar amount is, they would either create a fee or they would just suck what's left of Tabor out. Because I don't see Colorado passing a tax in order to pay for reparations.
No, that's a great point, Mayor. You know, I can't imagine that so many of these studies and commissions, you know, the outcome of the study or the commission is just happens to completely align with the Democratic Party platform, right? we got to
you know,
ban
and
guns,
it's funny you say that,
you know.
though, because we when we are going through our legislative process and looking at the bills that would impact municipalities, when we see things that don't have a study, we get concerned. So rather than them, in some cases, and I don't know that it's all cases, but in some cases, they put a bill forward and they haven't studied anything. And so our question is, you don't even know what's going to happen when you implement this bill. If you do, why aren't you studying it first for a year or two to determine if it's viable going long term? And at least in this particular case, the fiscal note showed 5 people. I don't know that you need 5 people for this. There's other states that are doing it anyway. Why don't you just copy what they're doing? Especially given the fact that Colorado wasn't a slave state. They didn't participate. So it should be a small study and very quickly done. But they've got 5 people going over 2+ years. Why do you need to spend that much money?
Yeah, coming up with a justification for future legislation. That's, if you ask me, that would be the idea.
I thought old Ben in the YouTube comments had a great point. What I noticed is that it's only about Black Coloradan racial equity. Hispanics and First Nations folk need not apply. So, I think that's a very good point because I mean we can say the Native American Indians had a very, very rough go of it in the late 1800s when we were a state. You can say Hispanics have had a rough time in this state historically as well. But why is this only going? Why is this only studying the African American struggle? It seems a little bit bigoted, if you ask me.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on this legislation here. Coming up Monday in the House Finance Committee there. So interesting, definitely a sign of things to come, I think, for future years, something to be aware of. So that's what we got for Monday. Those were some of the more interesting bills of the week being heard in committee. Really, just a reminder, we only talk about committee hearings because that's your opportunity as an individual, as a Coloradan, to have your voice heard. You get 2-3 minutes to show up, sit 10 feet away from these legislators, tell them what you think about these bills, and, get it out there. Get it out there and tell them how wrong they are, how right they are, if it's a good or bad bill. So people get involved. Our freedom is at stake. And it's really our only ability. One of our big things we need to do is just participate in local government, and that's how we can make a difference. So we'll go ahead and move on to Tuesday. House Bill 1438 being heard in the House Health and Human Services Committee on Tuesday. So, in my mind, this is one of those feel-good bills that we see passed by a lot of legislators every year. We're saying, you evil health insurance companies, you better cover what we tell you to. You better follow the rules or we're coming after you. When reality, sometimes these mandates on insurance companies only create higher regulatory burdens, higher costs, and maybe less coverage because then ultimately you're the state government telling the insurance companies what they have to cover means they might not be able to cover something else over here that they would otherwise. So this bill would make it a deceptive trade practice under the Colorado Consumer Protection Act if a manufacturer failed to comply with the insulin affordability program and the requirements for the emergency supply of prescription insulin, and of course authorizes the Attorney General to enforce these insulin affordability program, emergency supply of prescription insulin, and the EpiPen affordability program. So, we know with the understanding of economics that government mandates on things oftentimes lead to shortages because if insurance companies have to cover some of these products at a cost that this government's setting, and if they can't do it, well, then they just aren't going to provide it at all, right? So you might have some shortages in terms of EpiPens or insulin. Fortunately, let's hope that doesn't happen. Fortunately, those are pretty widespread items that people need to survive. So hopefully there's not that many hookups from some sort of regulatory scheme like this. But of course, these do-good legislators out there are going to hold these evil insurance companies accountable. So we see a lot of bills like this where they're going after trying to mandate certain coverage, and of course, having the carrot or the stick of the Attorney General going after them if they fail to comply. So Tuesday in the Health and Human Services Committee upon adjournment, House Committee Room 112. Interesting bill there. Moving on to Senate Bill 11 in the House Judiciary Committee. So this is the online dating service bill. We've talked about it a couple times. It keeps coming up. It's still going through the process here. But of course, these ladies, God bless them, that are sponsoring this bill think that the state government's role is to protect women who are using online dating apps, and that these online dating apps have to have new mandates and requirements if they want to operate here in Colorado. So not the role of government, not really the responsibility of what the legislature should be concerned with. But nonetheless, here we are. So for those interested, you can read through all the details here of what dating websites are going to have to follow, verifying identities, and going through and having warnings and terms of service. And I mean, there's a lot of information in this bill, but of course, pretty ridiculous that these legislators think that they can make a better online dating app or at least create experience or use for people in the community of Colorado. So absolutely utterly ridiculous here.
Yeah, we're not,
So bad.
we're not touching that one at the town.
Yeah, I was wondering if somebody was going to make any comments about anything here,
I'm
but
going to keep my comments to myself.
yeah, there's a lot that can be said. But it's a bad bill. You know, it's just an example, another example of the hubris of these politicians who think they can come in and go after every business out there and rewrite the rules and decide how they want these businesses to operate. But guess that's not how it works, people. I mean, these legislators don't necessarily have a better idea, and you might potentially be making it so that some of these dating services aren't going to operate in Colorado anymore, leaving people worse off, people who would voluntarily choose to use these programs.
Well, when we have four,
Anyways,
6 or 800 bills every session introduced, at some point you got to just think to yourself, when do they just go, you know, we finally reached the end of the laws. We're going to close the books. Thank you everyone for participating. We're done now and let's move on.
There's always something else to control.
That's right.
oh, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, if they have to get down to this nuance of it, yeah, I think mission accomplished, right? They're done. Just go home. Bad bill to Judiciary Committee on Tuesday upon adjournment in the old state library. For those people who want to follow along at home, you can always listen to these committee hearings from at home and testify remotely as well. All right. See what else we got going on Tuesday. So I'd love to get the uh, Monument Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem's information on this one. This is House Bill 1366. So, of course, like you were saying, kind of using that carrot of state funding of government taxpayer money that people in your community are paying these taxes, but you're only going to get it back to your community if you follow along with what the state tells you to do. So, this bill would require state agencies to prioritize awarding grants that satisfy a list of criteria described in the bill. So that criteria really includes a climate action element as part of your master plan. So you have to have climate related goals, plans, and strategies, and talk about what you're going to do with this taxpayer money if it comes to your local community in terms of achieving your climate action plan. So I'd love to get some input here on our local government representatives here.
We are opposed. It's been registered with the sponsors. Certainly, we don't want to be preempted. Probably the main reason why. We are going through a redo of our master plan this year. Grant money is very important for a small town. I think DOLA has provided us, I want to say 250,000. And we've budgeted another 250 because the going rate for a master plan is somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000. And it's not to say that we wouldn't take those things into consideration anyway, but being told if you don't do it would then prevent you from receiving grants for any other state programs. That's a problem. And even some of the smaller municipalities that have to go do this anyway, they don't even have the amount of money required to do a master plan update. They certainly aren't going to have the money to implement whatever things the state concocts for, making things green, right? Such as how the building codes are changing to, everybody needs to have a plug-in for their electric car that doesn't exist. But I mean, we're sort of in a sweet spot. We're doing this anyway, but we oppose the idea of being told we have to do it. It's an unfunded mandate. I'm 99% sure. And then there's the smack on the upside the head if you don't do it penalty, right?
How do you do a climate study or a climate plan or any of that stuff when you figure, electric cars and you don't have the infrastructure? Obviously California is dealing with brownouts now and they couldn't support it if they had to. And the power lines are falling down and burning down forests and everything else. But there, part of that climate study should be, what do you do to dispose of the batteries? What do you do to dispose of the windmill blades? And you've got all of these unintended consequences with this. And the fact is, nobody wants electric cars. Ford quit pushing their electric car lines, and so did GM. Tesla sales are way down right now. People want hybrids at best, and they want to be free to make choices to do what it is that they want to do. We're a small town. We can't afford to upgrade all of our infrastructure for some pie in the sky climate goal that hasn't even been proven to that it's a human caused element anyway. Climates change. I mean, we've got palm leaves in fossils all over the place in the state. So it was different at one time.
So let me ask you this, guys. As city government representatives, at what point you see a bill like this, at what point in time do you start getting defiant, if not right, spiteful, to rebel against something like this? Because this seems extremely punitive in the way this has been written.
Yeah, I mean, we do see many bills that we oppose, and it's based on the unfunded mandate, right? I don't know of anything that has been implemented yet, at least in, I've been on the council now 4 years, where there's been a punitive cause and effect. If you don't do this, we're gonna punish you. In fact, I would say this last 2 years of state legislators has probably been the worst in the last. I'd have to talk to our Rep Don Wilson, because he's been around longer and he's moved on from mayor to our rep, but he pays attention to these things, and he was mayor for 4 years. And I sort of wonder if he saw equally as bad legislation come through the Senate and the House, but more so, did he see the same kind of punitive damages that would be applied to? I mean, it's this. I just don't understand, and it really pisses me off that the state creates a bill that says if you don't do what we say you're going to do, we're going to punish you. Doesn't matter what the topic is. We're home rule. You don't get to tell us what to do anymore, right? The statutory towns are like Palmer Lake, which is right next to us. They don't have a choice. And I don't know what the rules are for Georgetown, being that they're territorial. I imagine they don't have a choice to do anything. But I don't get how they continue to put punishments in against municipalities, and that's okay with them.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there. It's all about this top-down central planning where they're holding your tax dollars hostage unless you follow along with their plans. And it's wrong. Yeah, it's wrong, especially when you talk about the home rule idea and just the fact that, Colorado has so many diverse communities across the state that doesn't necessarily make sense for everybody to follow the same rules. But of course, the state legislators don't really like talking about anything going on outside the Denver metro area. So going after these policy barriers to create pedestrian and bicycle safety measures, and climate sustainability and this and that, you got to get on board or lose that tax money, unfortunately. So bad news for sure.
Yeah, no parking spaces. Go build a 10-foot or 10-story, 40 dwelling units per acre, but you can't have anybody parking anywhere. Well, we're out west. Who's getting rid of their car? Whether it's battery or gas or motorcycle, nobody is getting rid of their vehicles. You lose your freedom, right? You lose your freedom without a mode of transportation. And it's a mindset out here.
Right. RTD is a big giant hole where taxpayer money just gets funneled down it, and they can't sustain themselves, and nobody wants to ride the trains or the buses or anything. And they just keep pushing us to try to do it that way.
If 100%. There ever was a state that was created to explore, it's Colorado, and it's an absolute shame what our progressive legislators are trying to do to this state and trap us where we live.
Definitely. Yeah, you got to take the mass transit, you got to take the train. All these new schemes are coming up with. There's another RTD bill we'll talk about here shortly, but we do have another guest just joined us here on the call. We have Ian Escalante from Rocky Mountain Gun Owners, the director of operations over there. So I'd love to, obviously had a big day today, Ian, but I'd love to get some update from you real quick. Give you a couple minutes here to kind of catch us up to speed with what happened today down at the state legislature if you're able to.
Sure. Thanks, Brandon, and thank you, Michael. I'm currently driving, so that is why my camera is off. So yeah, today was a very, very big day. Actually, it was a big weekend overall. The assault weapons ban, House Bill 1292, as you see up there on the screen, ended up getting its first vote on the House floor. So to give you a little bit of background, we had heard multiple things. Monica Duran, the House Majority Leader, which you'll see she's green there. I'm going to get to that in a second. She had initially told the caucus that she was a hard no and she didn't even want to bring it up for a vote. I'm not entirely sure what kind of backroom deals happened. I don't know if Epps and Hernandez got the radical anti-gun base to put pressure on her. My guess is that is what happened. So that kind of sets the stage for it. We find out on Wednesday night that the weapons ban is being heard Friday. So initially we heard no assault weapons ban this week. Get to Wednesday night, they say, okay, it's going to be heard on Friday. So they ended up going for damn near 8 to 9 hours on the assault weapons ban. Or actually, I believe they actually invoked Rule 14 and limited it to 5 hours, if I remember right. But they ended up with including the assault weapons ban all the way through to the other bills they had on seconds that day. They ended up going for about 9 or 10 hours overall. And what ended up happening is it passed on a voice vote. There's some weird shenanigans and some confusion amongst the Republicans. They were trying to hold a vote. They put in some sort of study committee. I think the goal was to try to get the bill referred back.
Ian, you cut out there for a second. Like Ian said, he's driving, so not surprised if he
An
there you go.
AR-15 assault, AR-15 assault rifle. Apparently, you can't shoot a deer with it because it destroys the meat. Even though most big game hunters use a 30-06, which is about 4 times the size of your normal 5.56 or 2.23 round. Like complete idiotic garbage that I heard from the Democrat side today. Just completely making things up, fabricating statistics. A lot of them didn't even use statistics. A lot of them just, vomited back the normal anti-gun, guns are scary talking points. We finally get down to a vote. Right before the vote, I counted the vote. So it says here that it was 35 to 27. Looking at it straight out, you'd say, okay, we lost by 8 votes. Actually, we only lost by 3 because you have to get the 33 votes in order for it to pass. So if it would have been 32 to 27, it wouldn't have passed because it wouldn't have gone for a majority. They wouldn't have gotten a majority of the chamber to vote in favor of it. So that is the big thing. So I counted the votes and I looked at it. I said, I predicted where it's going to be between 1 to 5 votes, give or take. Looking at the vote count, said, oh, they don't have the votes. Well, Monica Duran gets up. She's the last person to talk. She flips her position on the assault weapons ban, saying, I was initially against this. I own AKs and ARs, but I'm voting yes. Absolutely insane. And then along with her, Julie McCluskey, the speaker, turned. Both Duran and McCluskey were recorded as no votes on the assault weapons ban on second reading. We did force a vote on it. And they both voted no on second reading. So she flips, the speaker flips, and I think maybe some of y'all saw the video that went viral. I'm just gonna have you hit the hand raise button if you guys saw the video of me confronting Chad Clifford about him tearing up the petitions.
I reposted it, Ian. I
Okay.
saw the video and reposted it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I saw it as
that
well.
was a phenomenal video. Really showed that idiot's true colors. And just to give you what a major slime ball this guy is, he called he did the whole song and dance. I answer every phone call, I answer every text, feel free to call me anytime. So a gun shop owner who's a constituent of House District 37 called Chad Clifford last night and said, "Hey, I own a gun shop. This will put me out of business if this passes. I won't have any inventory. I won't be able to sell anything." Chad Clifford said on the phone last night, "I give you my word, I am a hard no on the assault weapons ban." As you can see, he was one of the three that pressed the green button to get it over the finish line. So that's the real, I mean, the amount of scumbag politicians we're really dealing with here in this state is honestly off the charts. These people are absolutely insane. So with that vote, there are a couple takeaways, some positive, some negatives. The big takeaway is the negative, which it did advance out of the House. This is the first time an assault weapons ban has advanced out of the House. And along with that, with the assault weapons ban being the most controversial bill, it is highly likely that the other bills like liability insurance, like the state permitting bill, it's very likely those all make it out of the House now that we've seen that representatives in swing districts like Jennifer Parenti and Stephanie Vigil, who are in red-leaning districts, voted like they represent Boulder. So they don't really seem to care. I think they know they're not getting reelected. They've already gone way far down the left flank anyway, as is. I think they know they're not getting reelected, so they don't care. They're just going to burn the place down before they get out there. That's a big concern. Additionally, now the ball is in the Senate's court, and we really don't know what they're going to do with it. They have a Senate sponsor on it. Senate leadership has given off really mixed messages about what they're going to do with the assault weapons ban. And it's really going to come down to which committee calls the assault weapons ban in the Senate. If the assault weapons ban is called the Senate Judiciary, it means they want the bill to die because Dylan Roberts will cast the deciding vote to kill it in that committee. If they send it to State Affairs, that is a stacked committee full of complete anti-gun leftists. That means that it is very likely the Senate is ready to take up and vote on the assault weapons ban and pass it. So those are the things we really need to be watching for here in the next couple days. Jared Polis obviously has his finger in the wind, as he always does. He never takes solid positions on anything. And if anything today, anything has shown, if I've learned anything from today, it's really the big thing is that Democrats, even gun-owning Democrats, really don't give a flying crap about your rights because they have their guns. This is not going to affect them. Rules for thee and not for me. That is the type of people we are dealing with. So we cannot expect just because they're gun owners that they won't vote to strip you of your rights, because this is not going to affect them. This isn't going to affect Monica Duran. She already has a stockpile of AKs and ARs. She probably doesn't need to buy anymore. Probably wasn't planning on buying anymore. Her kids are all big gun people. They have a boatload of guns. So this isn't going to affect her directly or her family. It's going to affect the rest of us. So those are the type of people that we are dealing with. So what I will do is I'm going to update the RMGO Bill Watch page tomorrow. It's not updated. I need it updated for the votes over the last couple days. Keep your eyes out. Take a look at that. And honestly, as RMGO, we are gearing up for a lawsuit. I think this might be where this is going to end up. We are currently preparing to spend a boatload of cash on suing the pants off these people. So if you were able to give to the legal fund, that's what you can do to help us the most right now, because each of these lawsuits costs about $750,000 to $1 million each. So we need all the help we can get so that we can take these people to task and we can actually get this law struck down. And maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Maybe we get this struck down and it's a bellwether to strike down assault weapons bans nationwide, or maybe we get it to the Supreme Court. But right now we're going to be focusing on the Senate and preparing our legal war chest. So thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Michael, for having me on tonight. If you all have any questions, please feel free to call the RMGO HQ, ask for me. I can give you my email and my phone number if you do so, or you can grab my email and phone number from Brandon or Michael. So thank you all so much. You guys have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you very
Appreciate it,
much, Ian.
Yeah, get home safe, and appreciate all your hard work down there. And definitely encourage people to become members of Rocky Mountain Gun Owners if you're not already. rmgo.org. They're down there suing the pants off all these local jurisdictions as well as the state for trying to violate our right to keep and bear arms. So good to have them down there fighting, and some very interesting news there on the future of this bill. But before we move on, anybody else want to talk about the gun bills, or this specifically 1292?
I just want to say real quickly, I mean, yeah, like Ian said, this is our final fight. We have to do everything we can. We're going to need every single possible person down at the Gold Dome whenever this goes into committee and whichever committee it goes to. I mean, let's hope it goes to the judiciary and this thing gets killed right there, because there's no way Dylan Roberts, as Ian said, there's no way Dylan Roberts can actually vote for this thing. Don't do what somebody did last time. I know nobody here would, but that was pretty stupid to do what they did during sensitive spaces, but it is what it is. But we learn, people grow, and we put the pressure on as hard as possible. Just don't cross the line.
Hey guys, I got to drop, but I appreciate you letting me join in. I really wanted to hear what Ian had to say, and I think the question was asked earlier about when does the municipality say no to the state? And well, in 2013, the municipality said no to the state as far as the Second Amendment goes. This is long before Steve and I were on the council. As far as it's a resolution, it's not an ordinance. It's embedded in the fabric of our home rule charter. And it's northern El Paso County. And we have a county sheriff that my guess is would not comply. I've not had direct conversations with him about it, but as many sheriffs across the country have proven that these kind of unconstitutional gun grabs are not going to be enforceable. I can't speak for my council, but if it came up that this were to pass and Polis did sign it, we would probably come out with a statement from the council's perspective, whether they are for or against this. And at that point, we would be able to inform our police department whether we were going to enforce this kind of bill or their cooperation with state authorities on it. But safe spaces, me personally, I will be carrying in my town council, in my town hall, and there isn't anything the state can do about it.
I love to hear that. Mass noncompliance is the future.
Right.
Yeah, definitely appreciate you, Mayor LeKind. We also had the Mayor of Keensburg just join us too, Aaron Lamb. And of course, we have Steve King, Monument Mayor Pro Tem as well. Love to hear from you guys on this anti-gun legislation.
Yeah, definitely. I do apologize for joining late, Brandon, but always happy to join in what I consider to be the most important Zoom meeting on a weekly basis in Colorado, especially if you care about what's happening in that Gold Dome. I completely agree and with Mayor LeKind, and I'm so happy to hear that we have more of liberty-minded mayors and town councils in some of our towns across and cities across Colorado. I'm sure a lot of you are already aware, but the town of Keensburg has passed 2 different resolutions completely enforcing our belief in the Second Amendment and that we do not believe in any encroachments that are coming from that Gold Dome, and most recently passed a resolution specifically against this House bill. So it's something that the town council unanimously is against, and the town of Keensburg, certainly the residents, are pro Second Amendment, a lot of gun owners. So I would love to see this bill fail in the Senate. I really appreciate Ian's insight into exactly kind of the dynamics of which committee and what that more or less will say as far as its prospects. I did want to ask, again, I apologize for joining late. Have you already discussed the excused of English and Weissman?
No.
I find it interesting, and that when I saw this screenshot posted earlier after the vote, it seems that it is a strategic move. I don't know if they have more real life excuses for the reasons that they weren't available today, but they already had the votes, so it didn't make sense for all of them to go on board with it. Certainly in some of the districts that are more toss up. I mean, again, with that being said, I'm kind of surprised even. Despite Vihill's previous rhetoric, that wasn't part of that calculus, given that she is in a very much a toss-up district that has previously been are. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And I think it's just an interesting insight into the politics of Colorado.
I will say that Weissman, he pretty much outed himself and voted for this during the Judiciary Committee. He even went after the quote unquote thoughts and prayers, which is a weird attack that nobody really ever says a whole lot. It's the first thing the left does is just rip on thoughts and prayers when nobody's really even said anything yet. Um, so as far as I'm concerned, he already said enough during committee to really make himself seen in a negative light, I'll say.
That's a great point, Michael.
Yeah, I'd like to say my guess is that this is probably not going to ultimately become law, but things have changed so much here lately. It's just hard to imagine. I've been here 32 years, and anytime any kind of anti-gun legislation came up, it was always killed. And for us to get this far says a lot about the direction of the state. Unfortunately, we've got a group of people that a small group of people have decided that they're going to mandate how we're going to live our lives, but there's the rest of the state. My guess is a overwhelming majority is not going to be happy with this type of legislation. This is mainly a front range and urban type legislation, but we're mostly a rural state, and even in these urban communities, there's a lot of freedom-minded people. Then this is a God-given right, not a government-given right, and we'll see where it ends up. But it's going to for sure be challenged, and it probably will ultimately get overturned. It will cost a bunch of people a bunch of money, go to the Supreme Court, and they'll declare it unconstitutional. But we shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Definitely. It is shocking. It's very dismaying to see how far this anti-gun legislation has gone. We do have some obviously the hope that it's not going to make it through the Senate, and then of course the other avenues in which it can be stopped. But just a sign of the times for sure in terms of where we're at as a state. So perfect. We'll jump back into the week's discussion here. Unless
And
anybody else has
I'm
anything.
gonna have to
Yeah, go
jump
ahead.
as well, so I'm gonna sign off because I have to go do something right now. But thank you very much for having me on, and I appreciate your time as always.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Yeah, hope to see you again.
Yeah, you will for sure. Thank you.
Great. So back to the regularly scheduled programming here. We were talking about Tuesday, some of the bills being heard in committee, where you as an individual have an opportunity to show up at committee hearings, speak, let these legislators know what you think, or even do it remotely over Zoom. So the first step here is knowing what's going on in this week in the committees. So on Tuesday is Senate Bill 33, a bill we've been talking about for a long time. First time it's actually going to see a committee hearing. This is the bill that would raise property taxes on Airbnbs or short-term rental property in line with commercial property rates as opposed to residential, basically quadrupling the amount of taxes owed if you have a second home or a house that you're using as an Airbnb, if it's being used for a certain specific amount of time that the bill specifies. So this bill was talked about back in January. It's finally getting its first committee hearing. There's been so much outcry, so much interest in it. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets delayed again, but as of right now, it's on the Tuesday. The Senate Finance Committee calendar for Senate Committee Room 357 at 2 p.m. Of course, looking at the bill sponsors, Hansen and Weissman, I'm sure there's a lot of their colleagues in maybe some of these communities like Aspen and Vale and other places out there, thinking of that Dylan Roberts who, wouldn't support legislation like this because I'm sure a lot of their constituents own some vacation homes that they love to get that Airbnb income from and do not want to pay commercial property tax on, right? So interesting bill, bad bill, of course, creating higher taxes. So from a liberty perspective, Senate Bill 33 is really bad, raising property taxes on short-term rentals across the state. Of course, there's some people out there who say this is a good thing because then it means that some of these people might stop renting their property out and sell it. which could lead to a little bit more supply in the housing market, reducing prices and giving people more opportunity to find homes. But nonetheless, this tax policy is a bad idea from a liberty perspective. So there we go.
If you can get
Sticking
out
with,
there, oh, I was just going
yeah,
to
go
say
ahead.
real quick, if you guys can get out there, or get over to the Capitol on Tuesday or testify remotely via Zoom, please do. This is, if this thing passes, this is also going to hurt a lot of people. So, this is how a lot of people make their living, is through renting out their second home. This is their retirement. This is the way they've decided to make their like, this is the way they've decided to make a living for them and their family. So we need to get out there and support the free market however we possibly can. And this is one way to do it. So
100%, Michael. I just want to share for people who maybe are never testified before or want to get that information out there. Check out freestatecolorado.com/testify. Have a really in-depth guide on how you can make your voice heard, how you can show up at committee hearings. That's what we talk about every week. So, if you're new this week, join us every week, and we'll go through all the different committee hearings and the bills you can have discussion on. And there's a link in this article here where you can see to testify, to sign up to testify remotely or in person. Of course, it's on the legislative website as well. But yeah, great point there, Michael. Let's see what else we got on Tuesday. One more in the Senate Business, Labor and Technology Committee, Senate Bill 192. I work in the dealership world, so I thought this bill was extremely interesting here. Changing how Colorado's lemon law works. So, of course, from my perspective, from somebody who maybe sells vehicles, this is a bad idea. It's hard enough out there to try and make a living selling vehicles in the state of Colorado with all the licensing and regulation you already have. But of course, Daphne Michelson-Janae thinks that consumers need more protection, that consumers need to be protected by the state so that they're not being taken advantage of by these mean auto dealers. So, interesting bill expanding lemon law covering motor vehicles affected by safety-based nonconformities, expanding the notification time to include the earlier of the first 36,000 miles or 3 years after original delivery of the motor vehicle, clarifying for any claim a consumer raises against a manufacturer, the lemon law is not an affirmative defense. And it continues on, lowering the number of out-of-service business days from 30 to 21, and lowering the number of required attempts to repair from 4 to 3. So this is definitely going to make life a little bit more difficult for auto dealers in the state of Colorado. It's going to make it more likely that they're going to maybe either have to increase their prices or decide who they're going to sell to, because they might have somebody out there who could be a problem customer and take advantage of these lemon laws. So interesting bill for those out there involved in the dealer world. So definitely had to bring this one up. Senate Bill 192, new this week, going through its first committee hearing here in the state Senate, in the Business, Labor, and Technology Committee at 2 p.m. on Tuesday in the old Supreme Court. Looking at the bill, it doesn't look like there's any other sponsors on this bill as well. So maybe a sign that it's not going to go very far, but nonetheless, an interesting piece of legislation. So we'll go ahead and move on here. Moving on to Wednesday, some interesting bills. Of course, another bill creating mandates on insurance companies, which could potentially increase costs, make it harder for these insurance companies to operate here in Colorado. So insurance coverage for provider administered drugs. I'd love to hear what Mayor Lamb has to say because he works in the medical industry. This is House Bill 1010. So, concerning limitations on drugs covered under an individual's health insurance policy that are administered by a provider in a setting other than a hospital and in connection therewith making an appropriation. Now, this bill has been modified quite a bit and amended, but let's take a look at the fiscal note to kind of get that generalized summary of what this bill does. So the bill prohibits health insurance carriers imposing certain restrictions on prescription drugs administered by providers. So for persons requiring a provider and administered prescription drug that is covered by health insurer, the bill prohibits the insurance carriers from requiring that the provider administered prescription drugs be dispensed only by specific network pharmacies, limiting coverage for provider administered prescription drugs due to an insured person's preferred participating provider, imposing additional fees or copays, and requiring the provider's bill certain provider administered prescription drugs under the pharmacy benefit rather than the medical benefit without consent. So, in my mind, this is creating potential more costs for insurance companies in terms of the pharmaceuticals and where they can be purchased from, which could potentially mean higher costs for these insurance companies.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak on that one, Brandon. I mean, from the get-go, definitely opposed to this. This is imposing government mandates on what private companies can and cannot do. Uh, Furthermore, in the experience with my professional life, I can't find many examples that this would affect all that much, to be honest. Because generally, I mean, again, my scope at this point is primarily workers' compensation. So you have that insurance company. They decide on a case by case basis, regardless of what pharmacy is filling the prescription, whether that prescription is authorized or not. So that kind of seems odd to me. But again, just from the very basis of it prohibiting companies from having their own networks and non-networks with just the limited scope of pharmaceuticals, this certainly would be expanded, I imagine, in the future to other types of procedures and other types of healthcare. So I think this is certainly a bad bill.
Definitely appreciate your insight there. So that bill is being heard Wednesday, Senate Health and Human Services Committee. Let's go ahead and jump over to the House Education Committee. This is an interesting bill. You know, I generally say it's a bad bill just because of the topic, but Senate Bill 188, Public School Finance. This is going to be an interesting bill, basically increasing the statewide base per funding to account for inflation. So giving more money to the schools and kind of changing how the budgets operate within the school systems. You can predict that this is, of course, a bill that's going to definitely benefit the public school system, benefit the teachers unions, of course. But nonetheless, wanted to bring it up because education, in the purview that the state government has over our education system, of course, is one of the most important aspects to what is happening in our society, I think, these days. And like we talked about earlier on the call, you know, opportunities for school choice and giving parents better options for their kids to have better outcomes, I think is so important.
Can I jump in on this one, Brandon?
Please.
One of the things that I think I've recently learned, maybe in the last year, that is mind blowing to me, is that all of the public schools in Colorado, they don't determine the upcoming budget year for the population based on at the end of the year or even in the spring. It's the middle of October that they take that count. And especially in our recent climate with all of these newcomers that we are so happy to have, they are rushing into the schools. I mean, you know, even in the last several weeks, there are many, many more. And by the end of the school year, some of these schools may have as many as 100 new pupils that will not be calculated into what their budget is for the next year. So before they go trying to just adjust for inflation, I think they need to correct for this, because it is by far a greater impact than just a percentage inflation adjustment.
Yeah. No, great point. Great point. This issue with school funding, of course, is extremely important, especially when you talk about mill levies. And one of the main reasons why property taxes have gone up in Colorado is not just, of course, how they're calculating it, but these increased mill levies every year that if people want to provide money to the schools. They love providing money to the schools, and people often vote for it. But at some point, enough's enough. You know, you have a broken system you're just throwing money into. It doesn't necessarily mean better outcomes for the students. So nonetheless, an interesting bill. Overall, bad for liberty, of course, as public school financing is. I think we have a consensus on that, but just definitely wanted to bring this one up because it's definitely one of the biggest education bills being heard this year that I've seen. So being heard in the Education Committee, House Committee Room 107, upon adjournment Wednesday, April 17th. Let's see what else we got going on here on Wednesday. I don't know about you guys, but I'm very worried that massage therapists do not have enough training hours. So thankfully, we have state representatives like Rose Puglisi, Mandy Lindsay, and senators like Michael St-Jeannet and Jim Smallwood for requiring that masseuse to be licensed in Colorado have to complete now 650 total hours. As opposed to the 500 hours of coursework. And, you know, that's going to make such a huge impact. I can't imagine how many lives this bill is going to save. So, you know, thankful to these wonderful authoritarian legislators who who obviously we shouldn't even have a license for massage therapist at all, much less why do they need to get more schoolwork? I have no idea. My guess is there's some company out there, some school, some community college or whatever that has a certificate program and it says, hey, let's raise those requirements. Make these masseuses take another couple classes out of my program here so I can collect that money, right? And that's the only thing I can think of as why there'd even be a benefit, why they'd even put a bill like this forward.
I couldn't agree more, Brandon. You took my point exactly. I mean, people often point to hairdressers, but massage therapy, we're not talking about chiropractic medicine, which is already controversial. We're talking about massage therapy, and I couldn't agree more. It has to be some sort of lobbying from these schools in order to increase this.
Licensing laws are so bad. Like you're saying, I mean, it's just ridiculous that you have to get government permission to cut somebody's hair. You have to get government permission to massage somebody. If you want to get paid for massaging somebody, you got to get government permission. You got to get people like these little legislators here to approve that you're capable of doing such a thing. Absolutely ridiculous. So bad bill, ultimately a bad bill. People in the industry, I'm sure, like this bill because it's going to reduce competition, make it harder for people to challenge them in the market. But Senate Bill 201, very bad bill being heard Wednesday. In the Education Committee, of course, because this is an educational requirement that these masseuses need, Senate Committee Room 357 at 1:30 p.m. on Wednesday. So this is also one of those great bills we can point out. Us as libertarians, oftentimes, love having a lot of Republican allies, a lot of great Republicans in the state of Colorado, like some of the mayors we've talked to, and the mayor we talked to tonight, the mayor pro tem, wonderful people, love a lot of Republicans. But nonetheless, you get the House Minority Leader, Rose Puglisi. Come on, she's the Republican standard bearer in the state house, and pushing this legislation through or just co-sponsoring this legislation is just an example of why some Republicans often fail. Republicans often fail fighting for our liberty down at the state legislature. So there you go. All right. So, now that we've gotten the massage issue taken care of, our state government is going to move on to taking care of vulnerable road users. So Senate Bill 195 being heard this Wednesday in the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee. This is not the first time we've heard of vulnerable road users this legislative year. Of course, the other one was to create a state enterprise, aka a new tax on everybody who buys a vehicle in Colorado or registers their vehicle, in Colorado, and would have to. Thankfully, that bill died. But of course, these vulnerable road users need protection, and these legislators are going to be the ones to do it. So requiring local governments to coordinate with CDOT and the Colorado State Patrol, both before designating an Avis corridor on a state highway, and requiring civil penalties collected by the state for traffic violations detected by Avis. The net of court and operations cost to be credited to the state highway fund and used only to fund road safety projects that protect vulnerable road users. So for those who don't know, like I did not, this Avis is this automated vehicle identification system. So if from a libertarian perspective, that is a bad thing. So there's a state statute that governs the use of automated vehicle identification systems on roadways other than toll highways operated by the Public Highway Authority or the High Performance Transportation Enterprise in the Department of CDOT. So very interesting. It does clarify that the state has final authority to authorize the use of this systems by a local government on a state highway. And yeah, there you go. So like you said, Michael, it's totally Big Brother.
Yeah, and I'll just say, isn't this already what Flock is? Aren't a majority of definitely big cities in Colorado and even towns using this technology?
Probably. For those who don't know, Flock is a free government or free company or a company that provides their services for free to local communities. Hey, we'll install these cameras all over your city. We'll give you all the data, and we get to do it for free. So what are they getting out of it? Well, of course, they're getting access to all the data for who's where in the entire city. I mean, it seems like potentially a ripe for abuse and misuse. But yeah, so another example of this automated vehicle identification systems that are operating out there in Colorado. And of course, the money that these collect, of course, they wanted to go towards creating more bike lanes because, ultimately they want to get people away from driving.
So one of my questions with this is, how is this not a Fourth Amendment violation? And why haven't we had organizations like the ACLU step up? I mean, sometimes we see the ACLU, which mostly does bad things, occasionally do the right thing. This seems like something the ACLU would want to actually um, stand up against.
Well, I mean, my thought based on the experience when our police chief tried to push this crazy ordinance onto our town related to hotels and motels, that not only does the person that is buying the room have to give their card license plate and their driver's license and ID along with their credit card, they also have to identify every person that's staying in their room, even if they're minors. And the chief brought it before us literally 7 different times. The board rejected it every time. There was a lots of back and forth. Ultimately, I think some things went on behind the scenes, and I didn't have the majority, unfortunately. So it went through. But throughout that, the questions were raised about the Fourth Amendment rights that these people have and of our citizens. And it was pretty much his argument was pretty much always, well, we need it for the safety. Well, what if we have an investigation 2 years back that we need to go look into, see if someone who was in that room? Well, again, brought up the constitutional rights. And well, I assure you, our lawyers have looked into this, and then this is not unconstitutional. Okay, well, I'm sure the same people that are pushing this assault weapons ban, they say their lawyers will tell them that's not unconstitutional. It doesn't make it so. So at every point, we have to be fighting against this.
Definitely. Great points all around. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity there for the liberty movement here in Colorado to push back against these automated vehicle identification systems, these AVIS systems, and this idea that we're being spied on everywhere we go. And of course, they're going to use that to collect more revenue, extort revenue from us who are just trying to get to work and feed our families.
Mm-hmm.
So bad bill is something to very pay attention to and keep an eye on. A very interesting topic. It's something that deserves to be explored further. This bill will be heard on Wednesday, April 17th in the Transportation and Energy Committee, 1:30 p.m. Senate Committee Room 352. Moving on, another gun bill, of course. They're going after the guns every which way they can. Of course, so Senate Bill 131 being heard Wednesday in the House Judiciary Committee. This is the sensitive spaces bill. As you can see, it's been amended quite a bit. All those lines are changes to the bill. And of course, all of the italics there, lots and lots of changes. So nonetheless, let's look at that fiscal note to see what the most recent update of this bill is. But it prohibits carrying firearms in certain locations as it described below. So they changed where it was at. Originally, of course, this was on nearly every place a public gathering occurred in Colorado. They've changed it to government buildings, prohibiting it on the property, offices, and adjacent parking areas of the General Assembly, local government governing bodies, and courthouses. Yikes. And then, of course, educational institutions, so prohibiting carrying firearms at public or private schools, colleges, and universities. So bad there. Of course, that's probably why they got rid of the school safety bill that failed, because this bill kind of takes care of that. And then polling locations as well. So definitely they're trying to limit the ability of individuals to have the capability to defend themselves, but also they want to shift the culture, right? They want to shift our culture away from people being able to carry a firearm in general. They want people to be uncomfortable. They want people not to want to carry a firearm and slowly chip away at our rights that way. So absolutely horrific bill, attempting to restrict the ability of good people from defending themselves, because we know the criminals, the bad guys, are still going to do it anyway. This new law is not going to change their bad designs that they have for their plans. So really bad bill. Shame on Senator Lewis, Senator Kolker, Rep Brown, and Rep Lindsay. I mean, some of the most anti-gun, anti-Colorado legislators we have down there. Unfortunately, this bill, as you can see, made it all the way through the Senate with those amendments and is now onto the House. Of course, full expectation is the House is going to pass it. Just because they passed the gun ban today, they're going to pass this one too. So nonetheless, people, please show up, speak out, have your voice heard, reach out to members of the Judiciary Committee in the Old State Library. The hearing will be at Wednesday, 1:30 p.m.
If I may say, based on Ian's earlier comments, this is the Senate Judiciary Committee, correct?
This one's the House. It's already passed the Senate.
Okay, I apologize.
So
the
it did
Senate
pass.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. You're good. You got it.
The Senate Judiciary Committee is where Dylan Roberts received some threats. So
So the Senate Judiciary Committee, they did pass it. They had a couple amendments, and they did pass it on a vote of 3-2. A 3-2 down there, where Roberts and Gonzalez and Michelson Janae were the only 3 votes on that committee hearing. So definitely a bad bill. Let's hope it doesn't go anywhere, but nonetheless, we know it will, and everybody who votes for it should be held accountable come election time. Last bill for Wednesday is the transit reform bill. This is a massive bill. I'm definitely going to be doing a lot more work on and talking to people on as well. House Bill 1447 would totally redesign how RTD is laid out. There's getting a lot of pushback from local municipalities, a lot of big pushback on this bill overall. But this transit reform would modify the duties and composition of the board of directors of RTD, the Regional Transportation District, requiring the Department of Transportation to implement a bus driver training program, requiring transit providers to coordinate with metropolitan planning organizations on certain matters, and modifying the allowable use of money transferred to the Department of Transportation in connection with the redevelopment of the Burnham Yard rail property. So these bills are supposed to be single subject. I mean, that's part of the law, part of the Constitution. Each of these bills should only be really on one topic. So, of course, the transit reform, it does 14 different things, right? It's par for the course, unfortunately, but a very bad bill. That's going to get a lot of pushback, specifically for changing how RTD elects their board members and maybe taking away some of that democracy that these legislators claim to love so much. So bad stuff here. It would terminate the current board at the end of the year and specify that the offices of the 8 directors whose terms expire will not be filled in the district election. It would specify that the offices of the 7 directors for RTD so it basically changes, trying to read through the bill here, but it changes of how they would appoint board members. So they create a transitional board. So currently, RTD, they're elected from people across the state. This would totally get rid of that board process and create a whole new board system in terms of where maybe you have government bureaucrats picking who's going to be on the RTD board instead of the direct vote from the people. So an anti-democratic bill at the very least, but a bill to totally change our transportation system, a common theme we're seeing here this year and last, unfortunately.
Brandon?
Yes, sir.
I'm noticing Faith Winter is still on this bill with everything going on with her and her drinking issues and her having to step down. I'm just curious, is she still going to be a part of this bill as a prime sponsor, or is somebody else going to take over? Just because I don't see how she can really go forward at this point, sponsoring bills and being a leader with her current condition.
Oh, it's a great point, Michael. I think there's a good question there in terms of, Faith Winter failing her duties as an elected representative of the people. It should definitely call her legislation into question. It will be interesting to see if another senator decides to sponsor this bill or if this bill ends up maybe dying because of it. So or being modified. But I think there's so much will behind this legislation, particularly from the people in CDOT and the people out there who want to totally redevelop our transportation system across the state, that we'll see this bill or a version of it pass on some level. Hopefully there's enough outcry that we can save. In my mind, one of the big things to try and focus on with this bill is having enough outcry where RTD can remain an elected board, elected by the people of Colorado, not by some bureaucrats. But we'll have to see how that goes forward.
So certainly a good opportunity for some fun public testimony talking about the importance of democracy.
100%. We've seen it, unfortunately, and that'd be a great article to put all the anti-democratic, anti-democracy legislation we've seen this year, because this isn't the only one. But somebody should be keeping track and getting all these names written down on paper.
Yeah, I think that's you and Michael.
So that's what we got for Wednesday. Moving on to Thursday, so the last day where bills committee hearings are scheduled. Looking at House Bill 1334, a bill we have not talked about before, kind of an interesting one, broadband service for multi-unit buildings. The bill prohibits a property owner of a multi-unit building, including a multi-dwelling and multi-tenant building and a mobile home park, from denying a broadband provider access to the property to install the necessary infrastructure to provide high-speed broadband service. So in my mind, this is an invasion of property rights. If I own a building or some property somewhere, and I don't want to necessarily, for whatever reason, modify my property to have some sort of broadband in it. Uh, my tenant doesn't necessarily have to live there if they don't like whatever for whatever reason, but nonetheless, basically taking away the rights of property owners to refuse broadband providers from accessing their property.
This seems like a crazy one to me. Like, I mean, just from the market perspective, if you are someone that owns several properties, don't you want that to be a selling point? If those providers are going to come in, your tenants are the ones that are paying for the installation and everything. It just seems like kind of a strange bill to me.
From working on these projects, this is what I used to do. I used to work for a specific provider that was, we'll say, one of the biggest companies in the country at one point in time. You probably pick up the pieces on there, from there. But I was a OSP engineer figuring out specifically MDUs. And it costs thousands of dollars. And that's when you're coming in on what they call greenfield, which is basically a brand new design from the get-go, where the developer is providing a lot of that conduit path for you. Because the way it works is you're responsible for getting to the property, but once you get to the property, they are responsible for giving you the pathway, which is basically a stick conduit in the ground, and to basically get from their property all the way into the unit itself, going through different lateral conduits, riser conduits, and being able to place all of your facilities along the way. And it can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for a project on just the company, just on the not let alone not only the developer, but the provider itself, the broadband provider itself. So it's extremely expensive to do one of these projects, let alone come in afterwards and have to stick a stick in the ground afterwards. I mean, I can't imagine how much it would cost to either bore or retrench. If you retrench, you're going to have to backfill all that sod that you kicked up, plus you're going to have to most likely resod the area that you did backfill. You're going to have, and then you're dealing with a existing unit. You're going to have to find a way to place a conduit route to not only just the individual unit where you've got IDF closets, but you're going to have to get into each individual unit as well. It's going to be an absolute nightmare, and it's going to look extremely ugly because a lot of times you're going to be placing not inside the wall, but on the outside of the wall. So this is going to be extremely ugly. It's not going to work practically at all. It's going to be extremely expensive for these property owners, because at the end of the day, the broadband provider is going to say, hey, we will do this for you at a much higher rate than it normally would if we were building from the ground up. So
Interesting.
It's not going to be pretty for anybody if they try to force this on everyone. It might be okay for certain broadband providers, especially if there's certain ones out there that are struggling that I could think of. But this is going to be a major problem.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head too in terms of who behind the scenes is supporting this type of legislation. I'd have to imagine it'd be the broadband providers themselves, because they want more customers. They want to cut out the middleman, which is the property owners in this case, and say, hey, we want to install broadband and collect as much revenue from as many customers as possible on your little building that you own there, Mr. Property Owner. So interesting bill. Definitely seems like a bad bill from a liberty perspective. Really appreciate your insight on that one, Michael.
Oh, and one last thing. I didn't even cover what it's like to build in the mountains. Mainly, you have to go up aerially, because if you have to, for example, let's say you have to directional bore into straight rock, it can cost $100 a foot. So absolute nightmare for people if they have to. So it's wild. This is a definite no. It's going to be way too expensive for everybody.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's on Thursday in the Senate Business, Labor, and Technology Committee, the place where they make it harder for businesses to operate. I put the call out on Twitter on this one earlier just to try and get some information, but we've talked about this briefly once, but Senate Bill 180 to repeal the Colorado Digital Token Act. So years ago, the Colorado Digital Token Act provided limited exceptions from the securities registration and securities broker, dealer, and salesperson licensing requirements for persons dealing in digital tokens. So this bill repeals that act. So that seems like Colorado's moving backwards on this cryptocurrency idea, but I don't have enough information to really say what maybe there was some fundamental issue with the Colorado Digital Token Act, and that's why it needs to be repealed. I don't know, or something's changed. But if anybody has any other information on this one, I'd love to hear it.
Is there a fiscal note you could pop into? I'm not very familiar with this, and I'm not too familiar with most of the sponsors.
Yeah, it just says it repeals the Colorado Digital Token Act, which exempts digital tokens from security registration and broker-dealer licensing requirements when the token is used to purchase goods and services and the token dealer files notice of intent with the securities commissioner. So, it seems like they're maybe trying to find a way to clamp down on cryptocurrency. I would not be surprised if that's kind of the end run around it. Ty Winter's relatively a good vote down in the state house. Fenberg and Lindstad, of course, are two of the most authoritarian. Smallwood could go either way depending on what the bill is. So I don't know. My guess is the securities people or the financial people don't like cryptocurrency, and that's why they're trying to repeal the Colorado Digital Token Act. That's my best guess, but I wish I had more information on it.
Well,
way
I must express my ignorance. I didn't realize that Colorado had its own separate securities and registration securities broker dealer. But that was handled by the Fed.
Me too. Now, the way I'm reading this is saying like, this is talking like, let's say, for example, I wanted to go down the store and use Bitcoin to buy some groceries or buy some gas, something like that. Hypothetically, that's what the Digital Currency Token Act would cover, correct?
I'm not sure exactly, honestly. I think it has to deal more with the dealing of it. So people buying and I guess it would maybe could include that. I'm not entirely
If I may,
certain.
Brandon, it does say exchangeable for goods or services. So I think that essentially is trying to cover, like you're saying, if this is a step backwards. They're trying to make any kind of dealing in Bitcoin or any of the other cryptocurrencies a very taxable event. I would say that's probably really the angle that they're going for it eventually, because they see this as a way to get out of that system, which of course it is, but they are just recognizing this and maybe trying to correct for past mistakes. I'm not sure when the original bill was passed that they're amending. So it could have very well been back before the time of the Democrats, at the very beginning of cryptocurrency, and it's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, we could search that in the legislative website. I'm sure something would come up under Colorado Digital Token Act. I hit the wrong button there, but nonetheless, the search box is still there. So it looks like maybe 2019, and the governor signed it back then. And Fenberg was one of the bill sponsors, and he's trying to revoke it right now. So interesting to see.
That is.
Don't know all the details, but I'd love to hear more about it for sure.
I think it's gonna be an interesting committee hearing for sure.
Yeah, governor signed it. Everybody loved it back in 2019, and now they want to repeal it. So keep an eye on that. I think cryptocurrency is definitely a major issue that the Liberty community or some of the good pro-Liberty legislators could focus a little bit more on. So great. A couple more bills for Thursday. House Bill 1448, the new public school finance formula. One of these other big education bills coming through, but they want to create a new formula to determine how each school district and institute charter schools annual total program amount to fund education. So they really want to have this new formula. I don't want to get into all the details for those interested, but nonetheless, this is a really big bill for education. So nonetheless, I wanted to bring this up and make sure people were aware of it for sure. So I'm sure it's a bad bill just because it's public school financing, like we talked about with the other one, but bad bill, but nonetheless, totally rewriting how they're doing that kind of funding formula. So Thursday in the Education Committee, House Committee Room 107 at 1:30 p.m. Okay, so two more. Had to include this one just because they have DEI in the title. For those who don't know, diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a big issue with this whole idea of trying to restructure society to the point where, certain things are more important than other things, specifically, the diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of overriding overriding how businesses or government agencies operate as they used to. So this bill creates multiple ways to promote equity, diversity, inclusion. They're calling it EDI in Colorado's child welfare system. It is directed to work with county departments of human and social services to update the existing annual EDI report using state data sources. Identify necessary demographic and other data that is not currently collected in Colorado's child welfare case management system. So it's just another way for them to institute these strange policies that are not focused necessarily on providing the best outcome for the child, but nonetheless going along with these other principles of equity, diversity, inclusion in child welfare here in Colorado. So definitely a bad bill, interesting bill. Definitely had to bring this one up.
I have a friend of mine that does some speaking, does a lot of stuff with DEI. I just went ahead and sent him this bill without any context, and all he did was send me back the middle finger. That was pretty funny.
Yeah, that's really about it. So, changing how the child welfare system works and along these principles, I'm not sure what changes they'd actually make, but nonetheless, something we definitely want to keep an eye on. So Senate Bill 200 being heard in Senate Committee Room 357, 1:30 p.m. on Thursday in the Health and Human Services Committee there. All right, last bill of the week. Bill, I'm surprised made it through the House. Of course, this with that assault and the gun ban definitely shows a sign of the times. But just looking at the bill history here, you can see that this made it through the House, made it through third reading, uh, and is now on to the Senate. I can't imagine that the Senate would pass a bill allowing uh, overdose prevention centers, aka safe injection sites, aka bringing this to your neighborhood community where people are injecting drugs. From a libertarian perspective, I think it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to allow these types of things, but nonetheless, knowing that the government's involved in how they're going to push it and looking at the bill sponsors, definitely a bill that's going to create a lot of negative externalities in the communities in which these are found. We've seen it in South Broadway in Denver, for example. Maybe that's where they should put these prevention centers in the places where they're already having the problems and seeing where it goes. But nonetheless, I'd love to get some other people's opinions on this one.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting one, and I absolutely agree with you. They most likely will be putting these places at Broadway and at Stout Street and these other Colfax and Sheridan, and all these hot spots of drug activity and unfortunately homeless and now newcomer activity. But all of these are going to be the hot spots. I will say, though, from a libertarian perspective, I don't view this as a completely terrible bill because it allows municipalities. It doesn't force us to do so. So these terrible municipalities that are already going down the leftist hellhole will continue to do so. And those safe injection sites will absolutely be a source of crime and other negative externalities. But that will allow us, other communities, libertarian, liberty-leaning communities, to not have them just by default, because that's what we already have. And that will attract those people in the city centers that see this and are having that conflict within themselves with what they believe as their philosophy and what they're seeing in their real life with their own eyes. And I mean, we've already been seeing more and more of that in Keensburg. And I think that's only going to continue and may lead to a positive outcome for liberty for a lot of communities in Colorado.
Definitely appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, this is it's just extremely concerning, seeing what's going to happen. I'm already seeing it now. I drove to church down Sheridan and drove back from church up Wadsworth, and I saw 3 or 4 people walking or laying down. And when you can tell somebody is not completely sober because they've taken extremely hard drugs and they're either walking in an extremely deformed way or they are just hunched over and their body is absolutely twisted. Saw about 3 or 4 people just driving down those 2 roads. And it's not like I drove extremely far. It's just the depravity of what's happening in Colorado is extremely disheartening. And it's sad to see us kind of enable all this. from a liberty perspective, absolutely. I get where that is. I mean, I don't want the state telling everybody what to do either. Um, I'm just extremely concerned about what's going on. And also, I guess my biggest question is what's going on within the communities. We need to be making a bigger push for people to actually be doing things within our communities to prevent things like this even happening. My preference would be if some place like this does open up, that nobody would actually be in it because nobody actually cares to partake in this. Is that a reality? No. But it's something I would like to see. And I don't see a big enough push within our communities to really help, because a lot of the problems that we're seeing that the legislature wants to use a government gun to impose are happening because the community itself is not necessarily caring about the people within the with like our neighbors. So I want to see a bigger push within our communities of people voluntarily through human action helping each other and trying to make Colorado a better place is what I want to say.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. There's not a government solution, right, to people doing these hard drugs and putting themselves at risk or overdosing or anything like that. Like you said, it's not the government's purview or mandate. They're not going to solve the problem. They're just going to waste taxpayer money or create externalities, create more problems than they're going to solve. We know that's the case with pretty much every single government policy out there. So I definitely agree with you on that. I also wanted to mention what the mayor of Keensburg said. Mayor Lamb, just talking about how this kind of provides that example of the different types of communities available in Colorado. So, from one perspective, you say, hey, if they want to have all the drug use centers in Denver, let them. It's going to get them out of Arvada. It's going to get them out of, Evergreen. It's going to get them out of my community, and we'll ship them all down there, and kind of create that bifurcation in a way that we're seeing so much happen across our state. So interesting bill. We'll see if it makes it anywhere in the Senate. I doubt that they will, because I can't imagine that, and I'm surprised the House did it, but so maybe the Senate, but I don't know. I think this bill is going to die. It'll be very interesting to see. But we'll know more information Thursday, April 18th, in the Health and Human Services Committee, 1:30 p.m., Senate Committee Room 357. So definitely check that one out.
I do want to say I would be a no vote. If it were me, if I were in the legislature, I would vote against this thing. But that's just me. But I think everybody wants to, I guess my big point is everybody wants to abdicate their responsibility to the government, and we should be working as people inside the government itself. So
yeah, fair point.
I mean, mine is nuanced. If I were in the House or in the Senate, it would be very difficult for me to say right now one way or the other. But if this bill passes, I can tell you 100% certainty that Keensburg will be passing a ban on these types of overdose prevention centers. So it's kind of a toss-up.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, appreciate the conversation on this one. Yeah, you'll be very curious to see. I really expect this bill to be killed in committee on Thursday, but we'll see what happens. So that's what we got for this week. A lot of very interesting bills being heard. We're kind of in the home stretch here. It's usually about May 10th when the legislature ends. It's a 120-day session, so we're getting close. Less than a month to go. Of course, it's going to be that mad dash to the finish line. And even though today's a Sunday, of course, the House convened for 7 hours or whatever it was to discuss 2 bills. So expect more of that. But let's go ahead and just, of course, leg.colorado.gov. That's your one-stop shop. That's your resource for everything we talked about. So people get on there, check it out, see what's going on, find out who your representative is, look them up. You should know who your state rep, your state senator are, and you should know how they vote. And you should know if they deserve your support come election time or they deserve your opposition. So definitely check that out. But let's take a look at some of the bills we've been tracking this legislative session. So House Bill 1098, we talked about this last time. It's in the same position. It passed. This is the just cause for eviction of a residential tenant. Did pass. The governor has not yet signed it. It does become law automatically. Even if he doesn't sign it, he can veto it, but I imagine he'll let it become law. So there you go. Harder to evict people, harder to be a rental property owner in Colorado under this legislation. Of course, we saw this House Bill 1292 passed the House today. Talked about that quite a bit. Senate Bill
Oh,
75. Yeah, go ahead.
one last thing. Prime the Senadora Julie Gonzalez is now a prime sponsor on this thing. That's why it's able to go to the Senate.
Copy that. Senate Bill 75, the one of the anti-transportation network company, anti-rideshare company, anti-Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, etc. Next committee hearing is not yet scheduled. This is the more reasonable, quote unquote, of the two. The other one is House Bill 1129, which would totally decimate our rideshare companies here in Colorado. That's going to be in the Appropriations Committee on Wednesday. We don't really talk about appropriations because they just pass it. There's not really an opportunity for public comment there. But nonetheless, that bill is continuing to move forward, surprisingly. Bill we've talked about since day one, this legislative session, the raw milk sales bill has no progress, no progress. It's just sitting there. We'll see what happens to it, but no raw milk update, unfortunately. House Bill 1174, the ridiculous requirements for somebody to exercise their constitutional rights, this new concealed carry permits and training program, will be heard on the Senate floor. It's scheduled on the Senate calendar for Tuesday, April 16th. So that's the chamber of the whole. So listen to that testimony. I imagine that this, we'll see what happens. I imagine it probably will pass on some version or another. So bad bill, of course, very, very bad bill. Finally getting some movement on this bill, 1296. This is a very bad bill, one of our anti-democratic bills this year, making it harder for individuals to request information from our government officials under the Colorado Open Records Act, or CORA. So very, very bad bill. Really disappointed in Representative Matt Soper, the Republican who's co-sponsoring this bill. So Monday, April 15th, it'll be heard on the House floor. So interesting to see the testimony on that and how that goes back and forth. But tune in to the Colorado channel. You can watch those hearings tomorrow.
Just makes me wonder what kind of stuff Soper's trying to hide.
Soper has been a definite disappointment this legislative session.
Are we running someone against him?
I'm not sure about that.
That's all right for another day.
Senate Bill 131, the prohibiting firearms in sensitive spaces. We just talked about that in the Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. The mobile electronic devices, creating the new infraction for people using their cell phones while driving, leading to dangerous police encounters and creating more opportunities for people to get in bad situations. Very, very bad bill. Senate Bill 65. Next committee hearing is not yet scheduled. Keep an eye on that for next week. Of course, the non-legal name changes bill, House Bill 1039 did pass. Polis, I'm sure, will sign that or let it become law, more likely. We talked about the overdose prevention centers bill. Senate Bill 3, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation Authority to investigate firearms. I don't believe the next committee hearing has been yet scheduled. The firearm liability insurance requirement, House Bill 1270, that is supposed to be heard today on the House, but I don't think it did. As far as I know, it didn't get heard, but it was on the calendar for today, Sunday, April 14th. So we'll see when that one comes up next. Expect that to be on the House calendar this week. A 70 looks good bill, allowing legislators to publish bill drafts online before the session starts. No committee hearing yet. Passed out of first committee, has not made any progress since then. Of course, we talked about this lodging property tax treatment bill being heard Tuesday. That's the Airbnb taxation bill. The towing carrier regulation, really bad bill to 1051 to create a whole new licensing and registration scheme for tow truck companies in Colorado. Next committee hearing not yet scheduled. Alcohol beverage retail licenses. This was a bad bill. This is the one restricting the ability of retailers to sell hard alcohol to only liquor stores. That committee hearing has not yet been scheduled. Keep an eye on that one. And of course, the good news we got to celebrate: the flavored tobacco product bill died. Pet animal registration bill died. Unfortunately, the reduction of state income tax also died. And that ridiculous vulnerable road user protection enterprise was killed, as well as Senate Bill 59. This is the one that would have shut down oil and gas in Colorado. So there we go. That's our latest and greatest update there, ladies and gentlemen. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. Appreciate the special guests. Very nice to be able to get elected officials joining the call. So thank you to Monument Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, and Monument, of course, the Keensburg Mayor as well. Michael Vance, Libertarian Party of Colorado, Ian Escalante of Rocky Mountain Gun Owners. We definitely had a star-studded event this week, and look forward to catching up with everybody next week. But before we go, anything else that anybody like to bring up? Doesn't sound like it. All right. Well, folks, take care. Best wishes, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.